On this podcast, we talk a lot about causes of death, right?
Mm-hmm.
People who listen to me are very familiar with the four horsemen, and we know about cardiovascular disease, and we know about cancer, and we know about neurodegenerative disease, and we can talk forever about these things. But we don't really talk about the very, very end, perhaps with the exception of a fatal myocardial infarction.
Mm-hmm.
And about 50% of MIs are fatal. But about 50% are not, and they're just setting you up for maybe heart failure or something else. So as difficult as it is, I'd love for you to sort of explain the mechanics of death. And we can start with the more common cause of death, which is cardiopulmonary death. We could talk about brain death after, but I'd love for both of you to sort of describe what's happening both medically, socially, cognitively, like to the individual through that process.
Peter, do you mean like the moments leading to the death, as the body's shutting down?
Yeah, in those final hours,
Mm-hmm.
what is really happening? What does it mean to die of cancer, right? Like, well, I think for many people, it's a very foreign idea that this woman had breast cancer. Okay, there were cells in her breast that all of a sudden acquired mutations. Those cells escaped from her breast and went to other parts of her body. But there's still a bit of a disconnect. Why did the invasion of those cells to her bones and her lungs end her life?
One thing to get right out of the gates here is bodies die, living things die. I think a lot of us absorb a notion of death that it's some foreign invader or something that comes out of the woods and grabs us, and otherwise I was just fine, and then not. No, and as you know better than any of us, that there are all sorts of things we can do to promote life. And there are a lot of ways we're wired to hang on to life and to run from anything that's a threat to us. Those are all true and all natural. But included on the list of natural things that we do is die. So that's what a body's supposed to do. I just want to get that clear. There's nothing wrong with you for dying. This is the way it's supposed to go. So your body knows how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about what the body knows how to do. I mean, in general, depending on the cause of death, whether the pathway might be cancer, as you're mentioning, or heart disease or neurodegenerative diseases, there's a final common pathway of a body kind of shutting down. And it tends to shut down by organ system, and it doesn't follow a neat and tidy pathway. It can happen kind of spontaneously in a moment. They're here and then they're gone. But very often, especially these days, most of us, like 80+% of us, will die of chronic illness. We will meet the thing that eventuates our death well in advance of the death. Oftentimes, if we're trying to prognosticate, help a person or family get a sense of how much time is left, we're looking at things like, are they in and out of bed, much? Are they getting up and out of bed? So if you're asleep on the couch or in the bed 50% of the day, and if that's sort of a progressive process, more and more fatigue, more and more tired, that usually in the context of chronic illness tells us we're heading towards the end. An interest in food and fluid is a big one. So a body trying to die, a GI tract that's on its way to shutting down, will stop sending hunger signals. And this is a big one for the audience to hear, because a lot of us, food equals nutrition equals nourishment equals life. So if we see someone we love or ourselves not eating, the impulse would be, well, put some food into us.
Mm-hmm.
That's life. I don't want someone to starve to death is often what we hear.
And also love, right?
Yeah.
That's how we show our care and...
Exactly. Symbolically, the act of feeding another is, the nourishment, the love, to your point, Bridget, comes with it. There's so much around food. But then before we cut over to Bridge to explain more, that's that good piece of the puzzle. The body, again, is sending you a signal, don't put food in me because it will hurt. If a gut is not able to process the food, it sits in place and can cause pain. Same with fluids. If we're forcing fluid into a body that's trying to die, that fluid will pool and cause trouble. So the judgment call when to push the food and fluid and when not is up to really a dialogue and a sort of a song and response with the patient. Once, you might try a little bit of fluid, and if that ends up in their lung or ends up swelling, then we pull back. But back to your question, so as a body's trying to die, it will stop sending signals for that food and fluid, and that's to be generally respected, not pushed past. Mental status. So people often get really fuzzy in their thinking, or and delirium is very common. So oftentimes they'll be disoriented, think it's 1912 and they're in a forest somewhere when they're in a hospital bed. So that's very common.
And BJ, delirium is not uncommon in the hospital. A lot of times with otherwise very healthy patients who are in the hospital to get surgery, the loss of circadian rhythm, the use of narcotics and other medications can easily induce delirium in a person who's otherwise not going to die.
Yep.
Is this a different form of delirium, and what is really underpinning it?
I don't know that it's a different form of delirium per se. Ultimately, it's a similar pathway, then it looks the same. So you can have a hyperactive delirium, which are very easy to spot. Someone's jumping up and down on their bed and going kind of nuts and acting in a way that's not comporting with the context of their sitting in a hospital bed. So hyperactive delirium can be easier to spot. Very often it's hypoactive delirium, which is we often miss, especially in the hospital setting. Might just be a little tangential thinking or not quite clear on what day it is, something that's not so obvious. And very often the person's just silent. And that's more often the case, I'd say, at the end of life. It's more likely to be a hypoactive delirium. And so it may be hard to spot. And the person's been sleeping a lot anyway, so you might miss it. But one reason to bring it up is because if you don't know what to look for, I think a lot of family members and loved ones will be at the bed, trying to eke out every last moment with this person and looking for clues about what's going on for them and last relational moments and exchanges. And very often I've heard from a lot of people reports of, well, gosh, my husband never said a mean word to me in our 50 years of marriage. And I've been traumatized for the last 2 years since he died because those last words to me were this vulgar something or other. Or he told me that he to get out of his, some harsh comment. And it's one of those big takeaways for your audience. Just please keep delirium in mind, because what it also means is that person who is delirious is not, you cannot
it's not themselves.
They are not themselves. So whatever they're saying, you really cannot take it literally. You really cannot take it literally. So that poor woman that was suffering for, if someone had told her about delirium, then she would have understood. She took it very literally and was suffering immensely. So anyway, that's a note about delirium.
It does feel like an important moment to pause just to note a couple of things, which is, delirium at the end of life, we take as seriously as we would in a more acute setting where someone's in the ICU with expectation to recover. And we think about environmental factors that influence delirium, like lighting and noise and interruptions, right? Because if we can minimize delirium, we want to. We want to treat it and care for it. I think the other thing about this space is that we enter into the rich and nuanced and complicated space of interpretation and the meaning that's being made around what's happening, right? So in that story, I was sitting at a bedside once with 2 daughters and their mom was dying. And she had been mostly quiet, hadn't really talked in a couple of days. And we're sitting there talking about her and telling stories, and her kids are telling me about her. And she opens one eye and she kind of sits up and she says to her daughter, "I love your jacket." And I looked at the daughter, and the daughter just bursts into tears. And, I'm sitting there thinking oh, this is so nice. Mom gives I'm expecting something positive. And the daughter's she's never complimented my clothes before. If anything, she always looked at my dress in this critical eye, this is so off, And I think that could be one of those projections that we're going to get to the end, and Dad's going to say, Mom's going to say the thing that we never heard them say. And they may, and that might not feel good, right? So it's it's complicated and so interpersonal and personal and subjective. And, it's one of the reasons why two of us being here together and why this work is done often in teams, because we could both be in the room with the same person and have very different kind of hits or interpretations around what's happening, what's most important in the room, what needs to be tended to.
God, but there's so much to say about this stuff. And that delirium thing, I mean, there's a big, on this point of altered consciousness and what people are saying and what's coming out of people. It's also true that deep, dark secrets can sometimes get revealed. That's also true. But so much needs to be interpreted, and it's therefore held lightly. And because there's these sort of final moments. You may never get the clarity of what mom or dad or that person actually meant in that comment, which is another trick to holding death in our living, is to hold it lightly, because we will find ourselves wanting to apply a story of meaning on all of this stuff as a humans, what we do. But one of the great lessons around this work is just to hold that carefully and lightly. It's not always what we think it is. And on that note of delirium too, I will say, as a medical person, I was taught that delirium is inherently a kind of suffering, that it's uncomfortable, that to be confused, to be disoriented is itself uncomfortable, and it's certainly problematic for the loved ones. So we always medicated it with antipsychotics, haloperidol and others. We just, Thorazine, just shut it down. I will say my own arc of my career, and as I've sort of diluted the medical piece with other ways of thinking, I'm not so quick to shut that down. There may be something either vital happening for that person in the bed to express whatever's in there. And maybe something that's helpful for the person to hear. I gave you the counterpoint that it's hurtful for a loved one to hear in a decontextualized way. But I think one of the meta messages here is dying, can't always be, shouldn't perhaps, maybe to use that hard word, be so tidy and immaculate and clean and, perfect. I think I want to disabuse, I think we'd both like to disabuse that notion of that's a good death. So a quiet death, a person. So I've increasingly would not medicate a delirium unless I had a conversation. If you were my patient, I'd say, Peter, hey, there might be moments where you can get a little confused, et cetera. And if that happens, would you rather, maybe there's an opportunity for me to ask you, would you like us to kind of err on the side of medicating that and help you sleep through it, or talk to family about that? But the bottom line here is it's not such a one-to-one thing. When we see this, that means suffering, that means medication. It's much more mysterious than that.
I'm Peter Attia. This podcast relies exclusively on premium subscribers for support, which allows us to provide all our content without taking a single penny from advertisers. I believe this keeps my content honest, making it a trusted resource for listeners like you. As a premium member, you'll get immediate access to our entire back catalog of AMA episodes and all future AMA episodes. You'll get longevity-focused premium articles packed with actionable insights. You'll get unrivaled show notes for each and every episode of The Drive, every topic, every study, every resource from each episode carefully curated for you. You'll get quarterly podcast summaries where you'll learn my biggest personal takeaways from the previous 90 days of expert guest episodes and much more. This journey doesn't have to be navigated alone. We can take these steps towards a better, longer life together. Become a premium member today at peterattiamd.com/subscribe to join me in a shared commitment to a healthier future.